Perfect.
Hey everyone, this is Tom G from Tabletop Bookshelf. I'm so happy to have this opportunity tonight to chat with Andy from Pandion Games. So why don't we just kick it over to Andy? Why don't you introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah, so my name's Andy. I am the lead designer and kind of owner of Pandion Games and been making games since 2021 now. And we just wrapped up our biggest Kickstarter yet for Substratum Protocol. And yeah, so that's me. Thank you for we got it over here too. I
Yeah, I
don't know
got
how
one over
cameras
there.
work.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
That's awesome. I'm so excited, Andy. I discovered Andy when I was first starting up the shop, actually, and was just so I was immediately drawn to his aesthetic and his eye for design, and got the books and was just overall very impressed. And it's been great to have you in the shop as we kind of get our journey here and get started. But let's like dig in a little bit more to your past. So how did you come into the hobby, and how did you get into making? What made you want to make games?
Yes. So I got into the hobby. I was actually an invite. A friend was like, "Hey, I was thinking about learning how to play Pathfinder. Do you want to
Mm.
learn how to play that?" And I had picked up like the 3.5 books of D&D long time ago when I was like a little kid, and I was like, "These are cool. I have no idea what to do with them." No, none of it made sense, and so I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll come over and I'll give it a shot." And I played 2 games over there, and I was like, "No, this is my thing now." And I ended up running some of my own games for about 3.5 years before I really made any of my own stuff. And then rolling over into that, I really liked making. I started off making player accessories, so
Mm.
cheat sheets and what I would consider, better character sheets that had like little cheat sheets on them. This is before D&D Beyond and anything
Yeah.
online. It was like you had like a downloadable desktop tool where you could like put in everything and you could print off a
Yeah.
sheet, and that was the best thing you had
Yeah.
to automate anything.
Yeah.
So I ended up making a bunch of content for Quest RPG, which is one of my favorite like low entry barrier RPGs out there. And
Sure.
I made a bunch of character sheets and cheat sheets and leveling stuff and all sorts of adventures as well. I made for it, and I posted it up on itch.io. I had no idea what itch.io was at the time, and somebody bought the free thing that I made, and they're like, "Here's $2," and I was like, "What is this? Why would you
Oh.
give me money?" It was a
Yeah.
foreign concept to me, right? And I was like, "Well, I'm kind of interested in this. Let's see what else I can do." And so I ended up writing. One of my first games I wrote was called Storyteller, which I still sell today. We actually have it as a real book now,
Yep.
and that actually came about because I was living in an RV full time and
Okay.
was kind of slowly driving around the country while doing stuff, and I needed a game that could be picked up quickly, played around a campfire, so there's no table, no flat surfaces, who knows what equipment we have, but so how do we still play a game? And so Storyteller was kind of me figuring that kind of stuff out, and then it just kind of snowballed from there after I had printed off 10 copies of it, and it was not great. It was like going to Staples. I think I spent
Yes.
$100 on 10 copies of these books.
Yeah.
I still had to assemble them myself.
Yeah.
Right. It was terrible.
That's the way it starts, though.
But
Yeah.
that's how the bug bit. Right.
Did you have a graphic design background when you got into some of this stuff, or like how did you get into like I want to make character sheets and do some of that? Because I feel like that comes through in your work. Like you at least have a sense of information design. So where is that
Yeah.
just come
So
from experience or?
no, no. So my background's actually in IT. So um, I am not a visual person. I am actually like a flow chart. Like in my mind, it is flow charts and words, and they connect each other. And so
Sure.
from like information design, I can do that. Visual design, I just don't think in pictures in any capacity. And so I'm very, very lucky. My wife is a graphic designer by trade, and she's a very, very good graphic designer. And so like I started off in like Google Docs, designing in
Yeah.
there, and I actually talked to um, the gentleman that did Bones Deep, which is a TTRPG. It's really good. He did the entire design. It's a hardback book now, but it was wholly designed in Google Docs, and it's gorgeous. And
Wow.
so I'd reached out to him and I was like, hey, how'd you do this?
Yeah.
And asked him a bunch of questions, and he actually ended up posting a tutorial on that. So that's actually how I got started, was just working in Google
Nice.
Docs.
Nice.
And then from there, I picked up Affinity, the Affinity suite actually, and didn't know what I was doing. I think I still have my first design somewhere around, and it's just like an amorphous blob that I was proud of. I was like, oh, I know how to use the vector tool now. This is cool.
In my mind, when you're thinking about the visual stuff, sometimes that'll affect the game design itself. So does that sort of dialogue and back and forth happen as you do the building experience?
Yeah. So now it's changed now that I think I've got 9 books I've published at this point. And so it's kind of changed. So it used to be that I would write something in Google Docs or just a clear text document, and then I would figure out the design later that matched kind of the vibe I was going for. And I would work with her, and I would be like, hey, this is kind of the vibe of the game. Can you give me a color palette and some fonts to start with?
Sure.
And she would be like, here's a bunch of colors. Here's, header and body fonts, off to the races. Now I design almost opposite. So I'll get a title of what I'm thinking of, maybe an ideation document, which is just a real brief. It's basically a project brief, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then it is immediately into Affinity publisher or designer, and I am building the logo and figuring out the fonts and all that to get the vibe. And then I actually write. People will think this is heretical, but I write in publisher because I need to be in the mood that I'm trying to write for now.
Awesome to hear all that process stuff and dig into that. But let's talk about Substratum Protocol a little bit.
Yeah.
So dig into it. So first, let's start off. Just tell me in your own words, what is Substratum Protocol?
So I would say Substratum Protocol is a mystery game about scientists solving an apocalyptic problem. And I've always loved the topic of scientists doing things rather than soldiers and combatants. And so it's delving to the center of the earth. It's gathering clues while you're going down there and identifying what it is that's happening. Yeah, like making your hypothesis and testing your methods and coming up with a solution. And in a very sci-fi, it melds the sci-fi, modern sci-fi with, cosmic horror stuff, because there's these anomalies that are occurring and it's doing all sorts of weird things. Yeah, it's I think it's an interesting take on mystery, because it's not your classic, detective mystery kind of games. It is a sci-fi scientific solving an apocalypse mystery, which I think is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's that journey of scientific exploration, kind of tied again with the, there's a little bit of there's that physical exploration too, but there's this other sort of experience happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And how did you I guess what made you want to make this story in particular? What made you want to do the scientist exploration story? Like, where was the point where you were like, I got to make this game?
So I'm trying to think back. So a little bit of history for Substratum Protocol. It used to just be called Substratum, and it was a breathless hack by Rene Pierre of RPGs way back when he first released his breathless system. And it was a 2-page game is what it was. And I really liked this idea of delving to the center of the earth concept, right? The journey, that whole journey to the center of the earth, the Armageddon, where you have scientists flown up to an asteroid in order to solve a problem by blowing it up, but by solving the problem, right? Like the Dead Space thing, it's like he's a scientist. Half-Life, he's a scientist, right? Put into these horrible situations. And so I really liked that idea, and I liked the aesthetic of the retro modern science outfit, right? An exosuit, but it's not a combat exosuit, it's a science exosuit. It's for gathering data and protecting its occupant and surviving through the harsh stuff. So that is definitely where a lot of that came from. And then it was just kind of building on that over time. Because Substratum Protocol was in development in this iteration, the book, right? This book was in development for about a year before we launched the campaign. And then probably another 2 months after the campaign as well. So
nice.
It was some time. It built up over time.
Well, it's a it's a meaty book and it's a meaty system, and so you can feel that. I think when you go through it, you can feel the layers of kind of the different mechanics and how they interact with each other. So let's talk a little bit about like the anomaly and the ending, because I know you made a switch there to from
Yes.
originally it being a portal, and then
Yes.
you decided I'm going to make it an anomaly. So that's a big deal to take the end of your game and say
Yeah.
I'm gonna redo it.
It
So
was the core.
what made you do that? Yeah, and talk about
Yeah,
that.
so originally it was a portal, and it was a core aspect of throughout the entire book. All of the storyline and everything was like there's a portal that is consuming the core of the earth. And I realized, so Substratum Protocol is a open-ended mystery. So through gameplay, players are allowed to define what the problem is, how it can be solved through the clues they find and the events, right? And taking context clues, like I had this event and I gathered this clue. Here's the answer of what this means.
Right.
And I realized during our crowdfunding campaign that I made a huge mistake in an open-ended mystery. I told them what the thing was at the end, right? I was like, it's a portal. Now what's it doing, right? Or what's coming out of it? And I was like, oh man, I think I really messed up. And I remember talking with my editor, and RP was doing consulting work for me on this as well. And I emailed them at like 5:30 on a Friday, and I was like, I screwed up. I think I'm gonna have to change all of this. I'm gonna have to we have to start editing back from scratch because I have to change so much. And this was like 14 days into the campaign.
Sure.
But the anomaly really allows the players to say, or define what is it and how am I going to solve it. So I think it opens up a lot more freedom of play, because if you have one of the things we're planning on doing is releasing additional depths that people can kind of slide into the game that are kind of unofficial. And it would really open up the ability for people to be like, oh, this anomaly is this weird thing it's not a portal, it's X, whatever it is, right? Maybe it's a giant creature that's living down there and has freshly awoken or something.
Totally.
But yeah, it was a it was a lot of stress changing that so late, but I do think it was the right choice.
Yeah. When you posted it, I thought about all the new gameplay options that you had opened up by making that shift, and it's a hard thing to do, but I think it definitely to the benefit of the final gameplay experience for everyone, for sure.
Well, I think because Substratum Protocol has pretty much a defined story, right? Like you have scientists and you're delving to the center of the earth, and so to keep it fresh and keep the replayability fresh, everything else has to be able to change. And especially if you have a GM trying to run it multiple times with different groups, I don't want them to get bored either. I want them to be fresh, shocked and surprised every single time of how it transpires.
And I'm really interested in how you talk about Brindlewood Bay being an inspiration here, and it takes that core kind of clue and mystery mechanic, which really innovative, or really works well, and was it just kind of a natural fit for you?
I love mysteries and
mystery games,
solo mysteries,
but mystery games are hard. They're like, how do you run it? How do you make it interesting for players? How do you not railroad people?
And I was specifically trying, when I first came up with this system, I was specifically trying to make mystery games for solo players. And how do you keep a mystery from the person that's also running the game, right? How do they have to know the answer at some point. You have to give that to them, or you got to give them enough information that they're like, oh, well, I already know what's going on. So how do you allow solo players to go through this entire thing and not know the answer until the very end and still be shocked by it? And so the Brindlewood Bay piece to that, which is like you can discover clues. These clues can be discovered anywhere, and then you build hypotheses based upon these clues you gather. I was like, okay, this is a really good start. And now how do I build this into a contextualize it so it can be played solo very easily? And that's the base system behind Substratum Protocol. That's definitely how that came about.
Yeah, it's great. It works out really well. I remember reading through Brindlewood and just being like, oh, of course. Why has
Oh,
it
yeah.
not been done this way? So
It's
so
brilliant.
elegant. Yeah. So kudos off to the Gauntlet for all their incredible work
Right.
over
Yeah.
there. So let's talk about another mystery game. Let's talk about Whispers in the Walls for a little bit
Yeah.
above your head there.
Right
Yeah,
there.
there it
Yep.
is. Whispers in the Walls. So that game has become one of the best sellers in the shop. And we talked a little bit offline about the reasons for that, but I'm curious again, like how did this game come about? What was the start for this one?
This was an experience. This is my first solo game I ever wrote. Was Whispers in the Walls, and It was one or two games after Storyteller. I was still living in the RV at the time,
Mhm.
and I was just like, I don't know how a solo game works. I'd only ever heard of 1,000 Year Old Vampire at that time. That was the
Yeah,
only solo game I knew of, and I was like, okay, so it's a bunch of prompts and this and that. How do we, how do I make a solo game? And that was kind of an experiment,
yeah,
and I wanted it to be very moody. I wanted to provide a lot of narrative context as people went through, but I also wanted it to be shorter because one of the things that intimidated me about 1,000 Year Old Vampire is it's a lot of time investment to make it through an entire game
yeah,
of 1,000 Year Old Vampire. So
yeah,
Whispers in the Walls is one, horror, which is great fun, but also you are basically drawing 8 cards and you make an entire story on 8 prompts, and there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you can wrap it up, which I think is really nice having that closure within a solo game. But it definitely
absolutely.
came about being in the RV and sitting around the campfire, and horror stories were big. I think I wrote it in the
Yeah.
fall too. Like, it was all the vibes were there it was perfect.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds like the perfect ground for something like that to occur. And it's great that it has this life now and is out there in the world, and
Yeah.
we keep moving, and we're just getting into spooky season here. So
I know,
excited
it's
to
great.
see
And
what happens.
huge shout out to the artists behind the art in the second edition of Whispers in the
Yes.
Walls. They did a playthrough of the first edition, and it was an illustrated playthrough. It's an artist writer combo that did this playthrough. It was really cool, and they got done with it, and I absolutely loved it. And they reached out and they were like, "Hey, do you want the artwork for if you ever update Whispers?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, how much do I owe you?" And they're like, "No, no, no, it's yours,
Wow.
thank you." And I was like, holy cow, this is absolutely amazing. I'm super super grateful to them.
What are their names again?
Yeah. So Overshia and Turtle, and they are big in the Fallout 76 community, is where they really stake their claim.
Nice.
But yeah,
Nice.
they're absolutely amazing, artist writer combo.
Yeah, awesome. That artwork there, it really sets the tone as you're going through it. And it's interesting that you took the timepiece into consideration as you were making it. I think that's really important in terms of accessibility, but also like you can feel it in the game, and I think it's something impressive to say. Like, I did an actual play on the channel that you can watch, and it's like I was able to do it in a 90-minute playthrough. You can do
Yeah,
it, and
yeah,
then you can replay it because it's
yep,
got the whole
exactly.
replayability. You only picked 8 cards, so you can go right back and do it. So just
And I think
it's
there's
yeah,
there's what 80. I think there's 88 entries. You pick 8 cards at any
exactly.
given time. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's just a really smart way to create something. It shows how you can create an expansive like possibility space with that
yeah.
slim document. So very much
It's
appreciate
oddly also by word count, one of my largest games.
that. Is it
Yeah.
okay?
So
So
like
it's
Substratum,
slim, but the word
it's
count.
slim. The word count's really because each entry
Yeah,
tells you a little story, right? Like it's each piece
totally.
is kind of narrative, and then it
Yeah,
asks you 2 questions each on each one, right? And
yeah,
so you could really just skim all of those words and just look at the questions and move pretty quick.
yeah.
Um, but like I think it's like a 30,000, 35,000 word game, where a Substratum Protocol I think is 18,
Yeah.
but it
Huh.
takes up twice as right. And
That is
so
wild.
it's yeah, it's crazy how the density works between the two. But I think it being short, but also being densely narrative is
Hmm.
kind of a really big benefit for the solo piece, because it really generates a lot of imagination for the player to like jump off of.
Yeah, with those prompt game, with a prompt-based game, having that extra level of detail on there gives that players that little extra something to latch on
Yeah.
to. I want to talk about the solo game genre in general, but first let's talk about journaling a little bit. So how does that design play in when you're building that out?
So one of the things that I'm starting to do, and I did it first in Whispers, and then I'm pretty much kind of doing it with every game since it's solo, is kind of a custom built journal.
Hmm.
Um, and Whispers is built in, but we also sell separately, like for Substratum Protocol. But what I think is really cool is taking a game like Whispers and saying, what was your card draw? What was the prompt that you did? And you write about it. So you get both the mechanical history, but also your story as well, as all built into one. And so we do that with all of our smaller mystery games, our bigger mystery games, our solo games. Is this kind of themed piece that documents the mechanics that happened in addition to the story.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a really cool way of like it's just bundling it all together, so you have an artifact that you can look at afterwards and be
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I remember when I rolled a 1 and I didn't make that pass, and so this crazy stuff ended up happening. Or yeah, I drew that Joker, and so the undead came after me, or whatever.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, I love having that physical artifact for these games and having it, and then it becomes also something that is real and shareable that you can get, you can say to someone, or someone else can share their journal with you, or you can look at each other's journals and be like, oh,
yeah.
I think there's just a lot more that can happen there. On that note, I think the solo game genre is in a really interesting place right now. I think it's getting a lot more attention than it has, and there is a lot of growth, I feel. So who's doing the most interesting work in that space, or like who do you turn
Oh
to and
wow.
you're like, I want to do something like that, or like I like the ideas that they're exploring in the solo journaling or solo gaming space?
Yeah. So Anna Blackwell does really wonderful stuff. So she does like Apothecaria. She did Delve, which was a very early solo game about dwarves delving into the center of the down mining and stuff like that.
Sure.
She's doing, or they are doing, very interesting things from kind of a more complex play. I think. I mean, RP is doing absolutely amazing stuff. Renee Pierre, he's doing great. So Stoneburner and all of his upcoming and new systems are all really interesting solo based systems as well. Armanda Haller, she was actually the person that really taught me how to do solo games, and she's an Argentinian based TTRPG creator. She does absolutely amazing stuff. She's does really interesting things with card draws and tarot and things like that. Blinking Birch Games, so Sam does really great solo stuff. Absolutely love their stuff. Um,
Yeah,
I,
speaking of
I'm
that soloing work or journaling work, I gotta get Outliers so I can give that
Outliers
a
is
look through.
really cool. I got my copy on the shelf behind me.
Nice.
It's good. It's very good. I think from so I like to look at what people are doing and be like, okay, what can I do that's not any of that?
Mm-hmm.
or take little bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in kind of, so what I'm experimenting with currently is in the solo genre is adding back in some of the more tactical, strategic, combat-esque things, but in a way that's not so broad that you need a GM, you need to do prep, or you have to pull in, like,
Uh-huh.
there's people that love that stuff that use using Mythic or other GM emulators to really just play
Right.
games, right?
Yeah.
Um, but how do you keep some of the journaling aspects, but also tell a larger story with some like where you have almost
A little bit
almost
more
like a
tactical.
Gloomhaven-esque combat, but
Mm-hmm.
less Gloomhaven and more TTRPG, right? Like
Right.
finding a decent balance that way. That's
Yeah.
which is totally different than anything I've done before, but
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a
seeing a
really
lot of that.
interesting. I think there's an interesting place of play there where it's like how hard do you make the rules in that tactical circumstance, and where does it start to bog things down or get, and that's where the challenge is,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
how do you operate it as a solo? That's interesting.
yeah, and kind of the way that I'm approaching it is less Souls like. I don't want it to be like stupid hard where you have to
Die
grind
or
or that kind
yeah.
of thing. Yeah, die and die. But more of a like a puzzle. Like,
Hmm.
okay, here's where my character's at. Here's what I'm being presented with. Now, how do I
Right.
win this? Right? Yeah, that's
Arrange it in
a
a certain
range and
way.
okay, they're going to move according to the rules that the monsters have to follow. They're going to move here, they're going to move here, so I'm going to do this because they'll do this, right? Like
Hmm.
thinking more chess like almost. um
Yeah.
but TTRPG.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
That's great.
and then yeah, so that's, I think that's a way of doing it where players don't get too bogged down with like, oh, this is too hard or oh, this is too easy. It's,
Yeah.
was this an interesting encounter?
That's
Right.
a good way. Yep. That's a good way of putting it. Where's the story and the encounter? That's what
Yep.
I want.
Yes.
Awesome. So let's wrap it up here. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or plug before we wrap it up?
So we don't currently have any announced games yet. Obviously, I'm working on things as I
We all have
expound
top
on where I'm
secret
going with
projects.
solo.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of top secret projects. I try not to announce anything until I know it's actually going to exist. But
yeah.
um, we are going to release additional Substratum content, so definitely keep a lookout on that.
Love
We're going
that.
to release new clues and new depth sectors, like a dimensional diner. And we had so
Mm.
many people asking if this was the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, and
Oh,
that we're like,
sure.
okay, well, we're going to release a
We'll
sector
make
now.
one.
That's what that is. That, and so there'll be these little like 2-page, 4-page supplements. We're going to give them away for free
Yeah.
for people to add into their games. So we're definitely going to have that. So make sure to follow and keep a lookout for all of those. We'll announce all of that. We've got a solo game that we're working on, and then we've also got a really big, cool game about steel-hulled trawlers and fighting against industrial capitalists that have tried to harness magical powers
Oh
to
my God.
get their way, all sorts of cool stuff. So
Yeah.
that one's really exciting, that we're working on.
Yeah. You're
Um,
singing my tune with all that. That sounds amazing. Can't
yeah,
not
it's
wait.
yeah,
Can't not wait to hear
that's all
about
going to be it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a little bit. But we'll
that.
probably also release some play tests here soon and take calls for play testers that are interested. So we always reach out to the community for our play
Yeah.
testers. So if anybody out here listening is interested, definitely follow us so we can holler at you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for Andy. I don't have anything to plug other than get Substratum Protocol at Tabletop Bookshelf. I will have a promo down below somewhere that you can use and get a
Yes.
little discount. So check that out. Thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful knowledge about
Yeah.
your experience and your process and just having a chance to chat with you has been great. So
Yeah, this has been fantastic. Thank you for having me on and the invite, and also working with me at the beginning with picking up our games and hosting them in your store. Like that's been absolutely amazing.
it is. It really has. So to the future, to the future.
To the
All
future,
right.
yes.